Hello, Christopher. Thank you so much for joining me on Education Transformation. I'm really excited for the audience to get to know you and your book, Abraham Lincoln, Tyrant in a Top Hat. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexandra. I really appreciate it. The opportunity to create a thing and then have somebody look at the thing and want to ask questions about the thing and talk about the thing. That is quite an honor, definitely. So thank you.
Awesome. I'm glad you feel that way. I know the audience is going to be wondering a lot of the things that I wondered initially when I heard about your book, and maybe they're going to feel the same way that I felt, like this can't be true. Abraham Lincoln is awesome. So let's just start with a question that's going to help them get an idea of what this book is about. So in Tyrant in a Top Hat, you explore Lincoln's actions not just as a moral crusader, but also as a strategic consolidator of power. So, what drew you to re-examine such a revered figure, and how did your research challenge what you were taught about him in school?
Started on the subject based on a recurring conversation that my father and my father's the co-author as well. Um, we've been having this conversation for years. Usually, when we found that things were happening in politics that we, especially federal politics, that we found dispreferable, and so the conversations would involve, executive power, and because everybody loves when the people they support are doing whatever they want, but then as soon as somebody they don't support is doing whatever they want, then it's an issue. So that's like governance and legislation is a challenging thing, and I love so much how this country was founded on these great Enlightenment ideals and around trying to create a system that could be as equitable as possible for as many people as possible, and not with that as a start, the aim as a starting point, the aspiration. And so we kept having that conversation, and it often brought us to Abraham Lincoln's legacy because we have the starting point for our nation of these ideals, and then we have this point we're at now where it can feel really frustrating. Everybody's over half of everybody's always upset about how things are going, and not a lot of people are ever just totally satisfied, for a 20-year period.
Very
But how
true.
do we kind of bring that together? So we're talking about Abraham Lincoln's legacy and the conversation around alternative ways to end slavery. Lincoln himself having talked a lot on the subject about, trying to appease the South and not wanting to let them leave. And so I pursued the subject and said, were there alternative ways it could have been handled? And how would that have affected us today? And what can we learn from that? So it came from a lot of like frustrations about some of the, I think, inadequacies in our system of governance. And some of the things I learned that were really interesting were just that if you look truly, I feel if you want to look at Lincoln's legacy through an objective lens, or anyone, you have to take the mythos away from it. You go to your primary and your secondary sources, and you remove people's opinions about those sources, and you also inspect the biases that might exist within them. Because just because they're a primary source or a secondary source, and every one of us, if somebody dissected our life, after we were gone, and they talked to everybody we knew, they'd find some people with very different opinions about us or about what happened. And so, going through that process of trying to look at Lincoln's legacy and then finding that if you just look at a lot of the factual actions that he took outside of the mythos, it seems that he uh, did a lot of things that pretty much all of us would agree are not ethical, moral, or justified. That was a surprise, but that's what I found when I tried to inspect his legacy without bias, or with as little bias as possible.
That actually is a perfect point to my next question because I was curious, what was the most surprising thing or personally meaningful thing that you discovered about Lincoln, or possibly about yourself through the writing process?
Well, so there's probably a couple very specific facts that I found really fascinating that I definitely was never told about when I was growing up, but are again really factual and easy to corroborate. Um, he was responsible for imprisoning around 15,000 nonviolent dissidents in the northern United States in his own territory, many of whom, like a significant proportion, were just nonviolent protesters or people who were speaking up. A lot of newspaper workers, whole newspapers were shut down, and journalists were jailed. I mean, imagine if you just said, like, if you're going to voice an opinion, if you're going to write an article against this, we're not going to give you a trial. We're not going to give you any due process. You're going to be put in a cell and we're going to keep you there as long as we feel it's necessary.
Whoa.
I just feel like somebody trying to excuse that is not on the right side of the issue. That's a really tough one. But so, learning about that process, it was really fascinating, and that brought me just to the conversation of slavery
Hmm.
and whether preserving the Union was more important than anything else. I mean, that was a really big issue. Is okay, so was it about slavery? Well, Lincoln himself said it was not about slavery. He offered a constitutional amendment called the Corwin Amendment that was meant to preserve slavery as it existed, unaltered in all Confederate states.
Wow.
And the South said that still wasn't enough. The Confederacy said that still wasn't enough for them to want to stay part of the United States. So there was essentially nothing. He said, I'll even guarantee you get to keep slavery.
Wow.
But yeah, that
That's
was
definitely a different picture. That's definitely a different portrait of Lincoln than I was certainly taught, because the whole image of Lincoln in my mind from my childhood is that he was fighting to free the slaves.
yeah.
That's what he was standing on. And you are completely shifting that to a whole different picture of Lincoln, who was apparently, as you're saying, he prioritized the Union over the abolition of slavery.
Yeah, he explicitly said if he could preserve the Union without freeing a single slave, he would do it. If he could preserve the Union by freeing every slave, he would do it. He was, famous for long speeches. He'd give a 3 or 4 hour speech. He only on two occasions ever actually said why he felt preserving the Union was more important than anything else.
Wow.
And that, I mean, he said he felt we would devolve into anarchy. Now, granted, there's been a lot more civil wars since the U.S. Civil War than before, but civil wars pretty much always turn into two nations existing rather than both devolving into anarchy. So he just had a bad take on that also, and
Mm.
that was interesting because what I took out of this process of learning that and so many more facts in the course of writing the book is just if you go and inspect something yourself, you might realize that there's a lot of evidence and data that you weren't given, and you might draw very different conclusions than just what's been brought to you.
Certainly, one of the things that I found really interesting in our pre-podcast chat was, and you can fill in some of the details for me, but one of Lincoln's top generals who basically stepped down right from his position because he wouldn't carry out Lincoln's plans, which included things like burning down cities with civilians in them. Is that right?
Yeah, General George McClellan. I see him as an American hero.
Hmm.
He he was a respected general. This is very easy to see. You can break outside of whatever narratives people wanted to paint about him once he was seen as a political enemy of Abraham Lincoln, which you're jailing dissidents. People might
Mhm.
start to report a little bit differently. General McClellan did talk about openly about how he disagreed with Lincoln's policies, how he disagreed. Abraham Lincoln supported burning down cities, entire cities, burning them to the ground. And this is who he's trying to keep on board. He said we need to get this war over as quickly as possible, so it needs to be as brutal as possible. Well, I'm sorry, but that sounds like some dictator stuff. That we're going to jail every journalist and we're going to burn down their cities until they submit to our will. How I just don't. How do people defend that in good faith? That feels just a little bit slippery to me.
Yeah. And
And George McClellan was a hero. He said, I don't want our soldiers to be treated like cannon fodder. I'm going to do everything I can to prevent them from dying. And I'm also going to do my best to only engage with enemy military forces, not civilians, and not burning civilian structures. Because even today, part of how we're supposed to wage war is to focus on military targets, not non-military targets. So
Right.
yeah, he went against Abraham Lincoln for president because he said this guy is not he's not being ethical, he's not being moral, he's not being just. And so learning about that process with General George McClellan was really fascinating because he's just been such a maligned figure, but he was highly respected as a brilliant tactician and a brilliant general. But Lincoln wanted people who were going to wage total warfare, not people who were going to actually try to preserve the lives of their own soldiers and only focus on other military targets.
I don't want to get too much into politics, but I can't allow this interview to go on without commenting that some of this sounds very familiar in the sense of some of what we're experiencing today, where people in opposition are being removed from their positions.
Yeah.
And, these are the current events that we're living in. And I'm wondering about how in Lincoln's time, how it was that as a society they didn't get the full picture. Now we're living in different times, right? And we have a lot more access to people's lives, to
Yeah.
the speeches that they're giving. It's easy for us to go onto YouTube or wherever and see what people are saying and what they're doing, maybe too much. So, um, and I don't know how in Lincoln's time, McClellan was unable to help people see the side of Lincoln that he saw. But bringing to modern times now, I wanted to share with you a study actually from about social studies teachers. And the study revealed that 70% of this is an American teachers study, 70% of the social studies teachers felt that they were unable to include things like current events, newspaper reading with their students because of the restriction of the curriculum and the high stakes testing. And it's making me think of McClellan's time and how the people were unable to see the real picture of Lincoln. Now, I know the school systems were different then and they were dealing with different issues, but given that understanding of that study, what is your take on how history is being taught in schools? And do you think that students are missing out on the kind of critical inquiry that your book invites?
Yeah, and and I can't put it on the teachers because I know when substitute teaching, when I was substitute teaching, kids want to learn, they want to talk about things, they want to ask questions about this stuff, but you are told, hey, we have to cover X, Y, and Z, or we're going to lose funding, or we're going to have this, we're going to have that, and I can only imagine how difficult it is for these children. Where if there was time to discuss some sort of modern event that everything's controversial to somebody now. I'm sure, you're going to bring up some event and some of those kids are going to go home and their parents are going to say, "What are they teaching you?" and get
Mhm.
like probably angry at those children, honest, because those parents exist. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And instead of saying like, "Wow, that's interesting. I feel differently about that, but why don't we talk about it more?" Actually getting upset and then calling the principal and saying this teacher needs to get in trouble. And of
Mm,
course, whether it's doctors or teachers or many other professionals, they're playing it safe because they're so concerned about being on the wrong side of somebody's current views, and challenging people's perceptions makes them emotional. It affects the limbic system. When they identify themselves with those views, their body goes into a fight or flight response and they get loud and not rational. And so for those teachers, those educators, um, they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place where they basically go to all this training, a lot of places 6 years of school and then 2 years of student teaching, and then everybody's telling them how they need to teach, even though they're the ones who went through all that training. They're the
mm,
ones who were instructed. They basically, everybody's comfortable telling teachers how to do their job.
yes.
Uh, and it's like they're supposed to be the professionals. They're the ones who went through the training. I don't think there's a lot of educators in any legislative body in the United States. Certainly not enough for them to be telling teachers how they need to do their jobs.
Absolutely. The lack of teacher autonomy, well, according to a study in Britain, anyway, I think theirs started in 1988 when they took away the freedom of the teacher and they mandated the curriculum of the day by day. And to hear it from the British people, the education system has been on a steady decline ever since then. But thinking in a bigger way, I guess, the big picture of politics and current events, not being able to talk intelligently without emotions getting overheated and things like that, with kids being able to have conversations and dialogue about the things that are happening in politics in their countries, in their cities, in their towns, is going to help them to grow up into adults who can govern better. And yet
Yeah.
and yet that's being removed from them. One might even think purposefully, right? But we could go down that rabbit hole too.
But, critical thinking skills, learning about heuristics and different cognitive biases, that skill set, being able to dissect information and determine its efficacy on your own is so crucial. And uh, there's just a lot of people who are terrified of ideas that are different than their own.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, I'm grateful. I'm so lucky to have the amazing parents that I have because I mean, I even remember as a child asking some questions that I asked my father. I will say that I was very young. I was like 8, and I said, "Is it possible that certain?" Because I'd heard some racist stuff at my school, and I said, "Is it possible that certain races are less intelligent than other ones?" And my father, he's like, "No," and here's why I believe no, and I'm going to show you why. I'm going to bring you information, and we're going to talk about that. I'll share some personal experiences and ask you some questions. And that conversation was so formative, and it could have gone very differently. Even if he had the same answer, but he'd approached it from like an angry perspective. Because then, when I was ready to rebel a couple of years ago as a teenager, what direction might I have run if I'd rebelled? Maybe into bigotry. If it had
Mhm.
been, no, that's horrible. What's wrong with you? Like you have to bring knowledge and learning with empathy and kindness and a gentle, you know, uh, uh, way. Because as soon as you get that limbic system, as soon as your limbic system gets activated, you're literally the blood flow in your brain decreases in the prefrontal cortex. You lose executive function. You lose advanced cognitive abilities. So you literally, as soon as you're afraid or ashamed, you're not going to be able to absorb new information.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, it sounds like you had a wonderful home experience. But what was your school experience like? Were you challenged? Were you asked to analyze things? Was curiosity a part of your school experience, or was it the opposite?
School was really, really bad for me until college. I had probably 3 teachers who, especially Mr. Turboss in 7th grade, who was one of I probably remember every compliment or kind word a teacher ever gave me. And I was a very difficult
Oh,
student, probably oppositional defiance disorder. I mean, I was very heavily medicated, and still was on the verge of expulsion constantly being kicked out of classes because I was bored. I found the classes boring and I just wanted to read books. And one time I had a teacher grab the science fiction book I was reading and throw it across the room and yell at me.
oh
And
my gosh.
I remember that very vividly. And it's like I did well on every test and I was just not interested. And sometimes teachers I would be yelled at, literally loud volume, when I would ask follow-up questions. I had a teacher once yell just because I asked if Christianity is really polytheistic and we're just miscategorizing it because it seems like if you look at like ancient Greece and stuff, what they would call a demigod is what we might call angels and stuff since they have powers, in that
Right.
thing. And I very quickly I feel like she just ran out of answers rather than just saying, "That's a really interesting point." She ended up raising her voice and getting upset with me. Um, and I had bad grades in every class I wasn't interested in. I had a couple. I was in an advanced writing class and I got a 100. The only AP class I was ever in. I loved it. And then social studies. I had a really good social studies teacher who would just allow conversations, and sometimes he was funny and charismatic. Again, Mr. Turbos, amazing guy, and he would just let us actually have conversations. And I've I had some pretty out there ideas, but he would never just. I mean, he might laugh, but he wouldn't laugh me off. He would have the
Right.
conversation. It was so much fun, and that was seventh grade. I was
Wow.
young, and those experiences were, but those were diamonds in the rough, and it was mostly coal.
Mm.
And I had very poor grades and was almost held back. Then I went to college, and I was interested in more of my classes, and was an average student for my bachelor's. And then once my master's came along, I was interested in every single class, and I had a 4.0. I had a great
Wow.
time. Finished assignments early. I My instructors loved my contrarian tendencies. In case you can't tell by me writing a book about Abraham Lincoln not being a great guy. Um, because in advanced academia, disagreeing is how you figure out how you get closer to the truth. If your ideas can't withstand scrutiny, then they're not valid.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great testament to the learning model of always meaningful education, where curiosity is what, ignites our learning journeys. Because I have learned full well that when they are interested, the sky is the limit, and we remove all of these barriers that traditional teachers deal with, like motivation, like focus, like attention, simply by allowing the kids to start with something that they're curious about, like you did at graduate school. When it was all focused on the things you were interested in, it was easy for you. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
they gave me so much medication.
Mm.
I was on very high doses of some different ADHD meds, but I didn't need stimulants. I needed to just not be like, if they just asked me what I was interested in, I could have taught history. I was a History Channel and Discovery Channel addict. I was such a weird little kid. I didn't want to. I watch more cartoons now by a large margin than I did when I was 8 years old. And instead, I just, and I found out later I have dyscalculia or whatever it's called, the dyslexia with
Mhm.
numbers.
Of numbers, yeah.
So, I felt like I was dumb too. I felt like I was dumb, and I was part of why I was such a good. I think I was a pretty good son at home is because I felt bad for my parents because I had this son who was a screw up. Because that's how I felt in the school system.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, touching on that a little bit more, I've talked to you a little bit about AIM, and we start with curiosity, and we like our learning journeys to culminate in contribution, using what we've learned to help make the world a better place in some way. Reflecting on your own educational journey, how might things have been different for you if you had been fostered in an environment where curiosity and creation and analyzing and dialogue and all of those things were a regular part of your experience?
Yeah, well, I can't help but think about the answer to that every time you talk about the great mindset behind AME, and that it would have been a wholly different experience. I think, a lot of my personal journey, I've been in a few different fields career-wise. I was law enforcement officer and soldier, corrections officer, substitute teacher, uh, uh, um, worked in politics for a little bit even, and then like public policy, worked in behavioral rehabilitation for behaviorally challenged youth in group homes. And when I look back at how my career trajectory was affected just by feeling like a screw up, pretty much my whole youth, except for when I was wrestling or doing at Boy Scouts. I did great in Boy Scouts. I made Eagle Scout in like 2 years, and it was, and I loved it. But feeling like a screw up 40 hours a week at school, it, I right out of school, I was like, I do not want to be in college because
Hmm.
high school and middle school and elementary school stunk, and so I need to go in a different direction because I can't keep doing that. And I value like my career, I wouldn't change it, but I do know that uh, if I had been supported and fostered and engaged with my own curiosity and encouraged that, and that was nurtured, uh, probably would have ended up in the sciences a lot sooner. And,
Hmm.
to be science education, the things that bring my life so much joy now. I mean, I had fun running around, training in the military out in the woods or whatever. I definitely had fun, but science education, expanding human knowledge, asking interesting questions, writing books, engaging with ideas, I would have gotten there sooner, a lot
Hmm.
sooner. That I kind of spent over a decade. definitely more than a decade, kind of wandering through different things to stumble on to wait a minute. When I was a kid, I always loved learning, and I still the whole time, whether I was doing security on the Iraqi border or substitute teaching, I kind of had to like wander towards this thing of wait, this undercurrent of loving learning and knowledge and ideas has always been here, but I just felt discouraged from pursuing that in a more systemic way because of my experiences as a youth.
Well, it's certainly one of the main reasons why AIM was born, is really because of the things that you're saying now, that, all of those decades that I spent being surrounded by students who were not getting to know themselves, not getting to understand where their passions were, where their talents were, where what their interests were, their strengths, nothing. They weren't learning anything really that I felt was going to help them live their best life. And so I'm glad to know that what you're telling me is that in that kind of environment, you could have gotten on your path a lot sooner, and maybe you wouldn't have had to jump over as many mental hurdles, perhaps, to get there, to see the value of your interests, to even recognize your interests.
Yeah,
So you bring a lot to the table. I mean, your background is incredibly diverse. So
that's
what's
one way to describe it.
yeah. So what's next for you? Oh, sorry, let's say that again.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say my family for many years would say, "Wow, you're doing a whole new thing now, huh?" And but thankfully, I've got the skills where wherever I've gone, if I just see something seems interesting as a career, I guess that's why I've had like six of them, is because I was able to hop into a lot of different environments and just figure it out enough to at least do it for like a year or two. And so yeah. Anyway, sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, I was just curious now. So, like, what's next for you? Because now you've written the book, so now you're also an author. Yeah, where do you go from here?
Well, um, until I have a lot more money, it's mostly going to be writing. But if a point comes where I come onto some funding, I was applying for grants and stuff
Hmm.
at the end of last year, but I'm not sure that there's as much opportunity there right now.
Hmm.
But research, I would love to be involved in. I've conducted two research projects and submitted them to journals, and they've been published before
Awesome.
about yeah, about and I just did those even while having day jobs. One was about law enforcement officers and their self-perceived deception detection abilities uh, versus their actual performance, and if there was a correlation, which if people think they're really good at telling if someone's lying, they're probably worse than average or worse than someone with a more moderate view. Yeah, that was one
Really?
study. Yeah, and then also one of the unexpected results from that was that uh, looking for nonverbal signs of deception makes you worse at telling if someone's lying, but looking for verbal, just listening to their words, makes you better at it. Now, most law enforcement officers are taught that you need to look for nonverbal signs primarily, and so that's most where their attention goes. They have a book that it, it's a very ineffective system that isn't accurate, and this study helped confirm that. And then the other study was just about emerging technologies to combat human trafficking. But I would love to get back into research, especially around cognition, knowledge acquisition, deception detection. There's so many fields that I find really interesting. My master's is in Homeland Security. My undergrad's criminal justice. So just advancing knowledge and learning new things I would really like to get to. It's just also I have to be able to keep the lights on.
Right. Well,
Oh,
thank
and
you
one more
for,
thing. One last thing too.
yeah.
Uh, I have an idea for a book that I've just started playing around with, which is about um, uh, how it's hotter and happier is
Oh,
the class I'm working with, and it's about um, working on your mental, physical, and spiritual health together. So instead of the whole 10-minute abs or lose 30 pounds in 30 days, it's like how can you create habituated patterns with your thinking and with your actions to become healthier in all ways because you will be more attractive if you learn to love yourself.
hmm.
That if you everybody wants to be more attractive. That's just a fact of being human. Maybe there's some babas out there and gurus who have transcended it, but I think kind of taking a holistic path towards uh, self-love and self-development at each level. Um, could be a good book. So I've been working on that a little bit too.
Awesome. That aligns so beautifully with what I try to communicate to my students. At AIM, we start with self-care, right? Because if you're not your fullest self, then you can't be there for anyone else, right? Or even for the things that you want to do. So that resonates with me deeply, and it's also part of my practice in my life. And I can honestly say that I am a happier person after, it's been about 15 years of the journey for me since I started on the self-care path of really just getting to know myself and what works for me and what food works for me and what kind of exercise do I like and what's a good sleep pattern, all of those things. And I'm a constant scientist and I'm a guinea pig in my own lab. So I really look forward to when that comes out. You must keep me in the loop. Very interested in that title. And I have just one last final reflection question for you that's bringing us back to the little kids that we are. Well, certainly that is what I am here to do, help change the world for them and help them know how limitless they can be. So the question is, if we want young people to grow into courageous, critical thinkers capable of engaging in real dialogue, which we've both expressed is incredibly powerful, and that leads to reshaping society. What do you think needs to shift most in how we educate?
If you asked me this question every day for a month, I'd probably have a different answer because there's so many awesome and important things. But I'd say probably distress tolerance. That's been on my mind a lot lately. So that's kind of a bias I'm bringing to it is um,
Mm,
developing and increasing and improving all of our ability to engage with discomfort and dispreferable things and handle them in ways that, after the fact, upon reflection, we can be satisfied with. So,
mm,
whether it's ideas that we might disagree with or changing systems for the better, like how we think about education, for example, part of I think a lot of the stagnation in the education system is just so much aversion to failure, so much aversion to
yes.
making mistakes, and that has led to um, things being so codified and so controlled that you lose part of that magic that can come from letting people do their job, letting people have fun and be spontaneous and engage with ideas and see where somebody's at. Because you just can't. Well, a schedule is important. We humans all thrive under schedules. The ability within that structure to say, where are we at today? What did you watch a documentary yesterday that got you really interested about something? Can we talk about that? um, that that engages with distress tolerance because that's a systemic distress tolerance. That's a
Mm.
communal distress tolerance towards trying new things and moving away from the mean, and also having understanding that I don't know, maybe sometimes there's going to be friction between information and ideas that are brought too. Like my book, Tyrant in a Top Hat. I've had people get upset. I did an
Yes.
Ask Me Anything on Reddit, and
Oh,
gosh,
wow.
people made a lot of precept. I mean, I knew it. I knew I was writing a book that people were going to get upset
Right.
about. And it's like I just wrote 50,000 words, kind of discussing an idea, and I feel like I found a lot of evidence and support for my conclusion. But distress tolerance, the more all of us can work on getting comfortable with friction and it's going to lead to better results for all of our futures, without a doubt.
That is an incredible answer, and I could not agree with you more because I do see how having any kind of aversion, kids with their social media and all of that, somebody makes a comment about them and suddenly they're falling apart. But I see it in adults too. So we should start with the youngest humans and hope the next generation will come up being more prepared, more flexible, more adaptable, more self-aware, ultimately. I did think of one more question though. What do you hope that students and educators take away from the complexity of Lincoln's legacy as you have now reframed it?
Well, I have a two-part answer. One, on a meta level, I hope they just get more uncomfortable engaging with uncomfortable or challenging ideas that really reframe how they've been taught something. Like, for example, President Obama, he was very influenced by the collaborative nature of Lincoln's hiring process. When he hired people, he would often hire people who were like his enemies and stuff. But I think, you can look at McClellan and jailing, 15,000 dissidents and journalists and similar thing to that, shutting down entire newspapers, starting a war that got three-quarters of a million people killed, having a military occupation where generals ran the states after, even when they had 92% approval for leaving and ignored diplomatic conventions. You can get good information out of stuff maybe that's wrong or inaccurate a lot of times. And gosh, such a narrative has been created that people can take something that probably isn't totally accurate based on the facts and build a legacy around it that actually ends up doing good because the mythos of Lincoln is a beautiful one.
Yes, it
The
is.
yes, the mythology of Lincoln can turn you into a better person and it can be good for you. Um, that doesn't, I mean, you could say the same about a lot of different religions, right? Because everybody either follows one or zero usually. So all the ones you don't agree with, uh, you would call mythology, and still people might get really awesome, great things out of that mythology, even if their preferred hero or deity uh, didn't exist, or their prophet didn't exist, or whatever. So that's the meta level. And then on the smaller level, it's again just being able to engage with, or sorry, with the book. Lincoln's legacy wasn't what we thought it was, and a lot of the what I got out of that was the how we should govern now, because at the end of the book I wrap up with ideas for how we could move forward. Because I don't think you should identify a problem without bringing a solution to the table.
Mm,
And so that was a really fun thought exercise then, is what could we do to do better and to more accurately represent the will of the people and have a world that has more justice and is more aligned with what citizens in a given area want.
yeah.
And that was a really awesome revelation out of the book, is like, okay, cool, I'm frustrated about X, Y, and Z. Well, I'm going to learn about this historical thing and dissect it. And then I'm going to try and use that to bring some conclusions for how we could do better today with the things that frustrated me. Those were the ignition point. And then I get to go to the learning and then bring what I learned to that ignition point and try and find solutions that could be better.
Sounds a little bit like the hero's journey.
Nice, nice. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being curious and following your curiosity and allowing it to lead to the contribution that you have made, which is Abraham Lincoln, Tyrant in a Top Hat. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to your audience for being invested and caring about education. Because well, one last note: when I worked in politics, it was just a known thing. You don't really run on education. If you run for office and education's your thing, it's a lot tougher to get votes than the boogeyman of we need to be tough on crime and we need to spend all our money on the military and on police. And it's like we will have less crime in 20 years if we're
Yes.
investing in children. We will have more money in 20 years if we're investing in our education and in our children. And so the people who are here are caring about the thing that really matters the most, will be the most impactful long term outside of immediate fear, danger signals. And no matter how big threats are, and this is related to Tyrant and a Top Hat, no matter how big threats seem, you need to be engaging with your long-term strategy, morals, ethics, and values. That's what's going to help keep you aligned long term.
Awesome. Alignment is key.
Thanks for having
The
me.
time. Thank you. Take care, Chris. Bye bye.